We are fortunate to have Mark Cassio on today's podcast. Coach Cassio is a championship winning head coach in Louisiana with more than 14 years of experience. Cassio has put on clinics and helped coach. Cassio has put on clinics and helped coaching staffs throughout the country through his business Courtside Consulting. Coach Cassio, thanks for talking some basketball with us today. How are things in Louisiana?
Hot, but good. We're getting ready for school, so excited to change gears and get back on campus.
Yeah, what's your summer been like? Cool thing with this podcast is I've talked to people throughout the country, seeing what is happening in each state. So, what's been the situation in Louisiana?
We've stayed in, I guess every state has their own phase, but we've been in phase two for a long time, which just means masks, social distancing. So not able to do anything competitive, which is a bummer for our team and program, especially our seniors, that they don't get a summer league because typically we can play a lot of games. But it's also it's been good for us just to really dive into the skill development part, which we actually miss out on a lot over the summer because it's so much lifting and playing. So it's been a different summer, but we've tried to face any challenges and turn them into opportunities.
Yeah, that's all you can do. As I tell my kids, we're gonna make lemonade. You know, if life's gonna throw us those lemons, we're gonna do that. So, anyway, a little bit of background and why I have you on is because it was March or early April, and you put on a couple of presentations during the coaches clinic, which I know a lot of our listeners participated in. I was really, really impressed with your stuff, and so I wanted to have you on and to talk a little bit about how you kind of came to where you're at as a coach, and maybe this will help some of our coaches kind of find their path as well. So to help kind of put this into context though, for coaches that aren't familiar with you, can you explain what your program's offensive identity is and how you arrived at it?
Sure. Yeah, great question. So kind of starting at the end here of what we are today is I call it driving space. Every offense is trying to create advantages, and we've been talking about advantages for years. I think that's kind of trending now, and we've kind of been a little bit ahead of the curve there, only because I've been fortunate to connect with a lot of great coaches. But we want to create space and turn that space into an advantage. And then once we do that, a lot of coaches are referring to dominoes, which we do as well. It's just such a great analogy that once we can gain that advantage, we just try to keep it rolling. Really, three things that I say the untrained eye doesn't necessarily see is the ball is going to do a lot of the work for us. So we're not we don't run unnecessary movement or actions. I feel like you can run a minimal amount of action and still get great shots as long as you have great space and great ball movement. We play off the catch. Spurs call it point five. That's how we train our players to shoot it, drive it, or move it. And then last, which I referred to earlier, was just a small advantage, big advantage concept that I think Brian McCormick has done a great job explaining. But in how I arrived there, really, I started as a motion coach. I have a motion background, and I loved motion, that it was positionless and lends itself to small sided games. So I feel really fortunate that I was brought up in that environment. But the game kind of changed to playing off the balance. And, when you have single gaps all over the floor, it's not ideal for the way the game has been trending. So I just kept searching for better ways. And one of those ways was dribble drive. And I think coaches that run dribble drive really well don't have this problem. So it's not really a knock on dribble drive or any coaches, but I know for us, I felt like our players were a little too isolated. So over the last 10 years, we've just kind of blended concepts from motion, Princeton, dribble drive, some NBA actions, all into just a cohesive, more of a style of play than a quote unquote offense.
All right. So one of the things that I remember distinctly from your presentation, and we actually, like, I tweeted this out and it got, you retweeted it and it got a bunch of likes and stuff like that, was the idea of the anatomy of a possession. And so, can you kind of explain that to our listeners and then talk about maybe how those concepts helped you in developing your team's identity, and then maybe how that carries over into your teaching today?
Yeah. So I think as soon as you gain possession of the ball, the first thing that we're looking for is spacing. So we like to arrive spaced and organized. I like my full court alignment to match my half court alignment. So when we're hitting the sidelines, we're playing with pace and transition, we're trying to open up the floor immediately and just put pressure on the defense with our space and pace. And I think the one thing that really has struck me in my evolution as a coach is that spacing can be your create action. Because the next kind of part of offense is when you arrive in the half court, most teams will kind of get to their spots and set something up, whether you're on a secondary break or even if you're just flowing into a drag action or something off the ball. I just felt like we didn't necessarily need to do this. And so we do run create actions. We run actions to create space, to create advantages. And that's really what more of our offense is predicated on. Instead of creating catch and shoot situations off a screen, it's more of how can we get our guys in space with some momentum against their defender? Because that's going to have that first domino fall. I just think we're all limited with practice time. So the most simple we can keep those actions, the better. But whatever our spacing or create action is, we're going to try to keep it as simple as we can and force rotation. So anatomy of possession first would be the spacing. Second, for a lot of teams, is the quote unquote actions that you run. And then the last thing is decision making, because once you get that first domino to fall, it's really an application of skills where you're turning small advantage into big advantage. And then you're just, teaching your team shot selection and how to create better shots for yourself or your teammates. So the way I kind of arrived at that is when we were running motion, we were kind of all packed in right at the 3-point line. But then when we were working defensive drills, I asked the offense to really get wide and high and space out to make it harder on the defense. And I just had this moment where I'm sitting on the baseline and my defensive guys that are on the floor couldn't keep the ball out of the paint. And young, dumb me, and I'm still pretty dumb, but I'm yelling at, just getting infuriated at my defense because we couldn't guard it. But the thing about shell drills, when you're just asking your guys to just get into the paint, you're playing 0.5 basketball. And this was like years ago before that was really a thing or common knowledge. And I had this moment where I just said, could this be our offense? And immediately I dismissed it because I didn't feel like I'd be doing our kids justice. But the way that kind of evolved is now our players love playing in our system. They understand spacing, they understand how to create advantages, and then practice really becomes about training their decision making.
Well, it seems like in watching the clips of your team, like what you've almost put yourself into automatically is the flow part that we kind of talk about. We're obviously pushing the ball up the floor, but a lot of cases you see if nothing's there, then teams will kind of back it out and let the defense set. Whereas with you, like it's automatically starting to go and get into that flow that coaches like to talk about.
Yeah, I think so. Our goal is to never face a set defense, so when the whistle blows or something, it's just kind of like a bummer because now we're going to have to run some offense. And I find the more offense my team runs, the more worried I get because we can't create an advantage, right? We're just neutral and we're having to run so much offense. So make or miss, we're trying to get down the floor and flow into that offense so we can give defense 2 to 3 seconds less to get organized. And I find that's really the most fun kind of phase of a possession or stage of a possession for me to coach. The transition, I think, is most fun for the players because they're rocking and rolling, getting layups and shooting threes. Some coaches enjoy the half-court offense because they get to see, kind of the X's and O's come out. For me, I love the early offense phase where we're still in the half court, and it might even be 4-on-4, 5-on-5, but we still have this small advantage because we're organized and defense isn't. So we just get to rock and roll and go straight to the play after the play, where we're arriving with advantage, and now we just have to keep the ball moving and play 0.5.
Now, one of the things that I thought was interesting was, and I'm not saying that you don't run any sets or anything like that, but you talked about how basically like if you're going to run a play, like you've got to teach those kids a bunch of different things. And so, as coaches, a lot of us are on Twitter and we're seeing all these complex plays and stuff like that. And I see them and I'm like, that's pretty cool, but I don't have the kids that can run that. So when I watch your highlights, as you talked about, it's about spacing, pacing, movement, and your kids take advantage of that. Ultimately, some pretty simple stuff. So what are some advantages that you've gained as a coach by kind of simplifying?
I think what it allows you to do is more random practice, and just your practice turns into a whole nother dimension. So you don't have to work on defense over here, and then we have our offensive period, and then we have our scrimmage period. Since our offense's advantages and decision making, we can work defense, concepts, offense, um, applying skills all in one segment of practice. And really, we can practice shorter but harder, get in, get out, keep our guys fresh, and keep that competitive edge as the season goes on. Um, and yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do it. I've never been a set play guy, just because even when I ran motion, motion takes so much time to get the timing right, to teach the cuts, to read the defense off screens, that just set plays were never a priority of ours. It doesn't mean that that's not a good way to play. It doesn't mean that we don't call some stuff. But at the end of the day, I feel like we can get the shots that we want without them. So I don't feel the need to inject myself into the possessions most of the time.
So one of the issues that I've had, and we're kind of motion based in our program, is that we do an okay job throughout the regular season. We can do good in the district tournament, although teams kind of slow us down a little bit more, and then we get to state, and it's tough to get sometimes to get scoring. So what are some things that you've done to kind of counter that? Because I'm sure defenses in your area are starting to they know what you're doing.
Right. We're constantly having to tweak and evolve because, like you said, we got some great coaches around here, and they're scouting and they're working hard and they're taking away what we do well. So, that's always going to make you better. Just when you face great coaches, that's going to challenge you. I find no matter what system I'm coaching, I think pressure man to man gives us the most trouble. When you're facing better athletes that are really heating you up, I think that's disruptive. And that's why we want to be disruptive on defense. But I find most coaches that are running something similar to what we run are more worried about pack line. And that's been the opposite of us. So maybe you mentioned that when you get to state, it's kind of harder to score. I found that when I was a motion coach, and passing and catches were going to be hard to come by, where we're really going to have to compete for every catch to get the catch where we want it. And when we do catch, we're going to have to be triple threat and moving, sweeping, and swinging. I found that was really disruptive. So one thing that we've really focused on as this offense has evolved, I would say almost everything has been geared towards how can we counter or attack pressure, because that's been the most difficult thing. So we have this system now streamlined where we don't really have to over prepare for any defensive system, whether it's pressure, pack, or zone. The concepts are the concepts. They're all universal. If we see one defense, we might just really emphasize two or three of these concepts, and then a different defense could bring out some different concepts that our kids already know. We can practice them without really having to put a lot of emphasis on the opponent.
All right. What are your practices like?
Good question. So we like I said, we like to go competitive and short with a lot of shooting. So if we're not shooting, we're competing more than likely. We don't do any, we kind of use the game as the warm up, so we can kind of jump right in. We want it to be player led, high energy, a lot of communication, really competitive. We chart every single shot that kids take. We keep a competitive cauldron, so we're always keeping score. And it's just, it basically a few different categories that most of our drills fall into. It's either individual skills on either side of the ball. I think shooting is its own category of skill development. And then we have small-sided games and then live competition. So we use small-sided games to really work our defense. If we have to throw like 5-10 minutes of defense to really clean something up, we will. But I would say most practice plans don't really have a defensive segment, although I think we've been a really good defensive team the last few years.
So that kind of leads me to my next question is that, you've talked about your team practices in a jungle and not a zoo. And so first of all, can you explain that to me? And then also, if you're using that system, like how do you teach a skill to your players, like something defensively that you need to focus on?
Yeah, so the whole zoo versus jungle thing really came from trainugly.com. Um, it was just something that I came across, and it really struck me because I was very guilty of running a zoo-like practice, just where everything's going to be provided for the players. They're not really going to have to struggle, and we all know as coaches that adversity is going to make us better, right? If you run from adversity, you're just, at some point it's going to catch up with you. So when we really change the mindset of our program that we need to be more like jungle tigers, and just there's got to be a certain level of ugliness and randomness to your practice. But also, I think what that helped our program do is to really turn the corner, because I'm fortunate to coach great kids, but there some of them have struggles, no doubt, but other ones don't really struggle a whole lot when they go home. They have things provided for them. They might get a car when they're 16. So we have to find a way for those guys to develop some kind of edge. And when we started preaching this to our kids, it was just kind of like find a way. Like nobody cares, just kind of get it done. And they relied less on us for answers, and it was more of like, okay, I'm going to find a way. So it really helped us. Like when we would go to the weight room and the weight room was double booked, it's just like, hey, the jungle's random. Like, hey, that's part of it. We got a predator in here. Or if the bus breaks down, it's just like we kind of just embraced, like, hey, it's the jungle. It's crazy in here. And it just kind of helped us get over things, and just develop a certain level of toughness to our program.
All right. So I know that through your business, Courtside Consulting, you work with quite a few coaches. And there's probably, when you talk about a system like this, one hesitation for a lot of coaches is just like, what is practice going to be like? So can you kind of tell me what your first practice looked like? And was there some frustration there for both you and the kids?
Yeah, I think now, just with the experience, practice has become fairly easy to plan. Just I think if you can clearly identify a few objectives and just not stray away from that, things become really easy. I find less is more. I think when you're constructing this style of play, the biggest thing that's paid dividends for us is early in the season is put offense at an advantage. And that seems backwards. I find that most coaches, when they're teaching offense, they teach it from neutral. Like, hey, we're going to, let's play 2-on-2 down screen, or let's play 3-on-3 ball screen. But you're asking your players to do a whole lot early, right? You have to teach them the action, and then you have to work on the action after the action. So what we get to is just, hey, we're going to put offense at an advantage. We'll put 5 offensive players out there and only 3 defenders out there. That way, early, they don't have to know the offense, but you're starting to train the 0.5 mentality, and you're getting your players to just understand what advantages are and the value of ball movement. Because when you have an advantage, you don't have to do a whole lot else other than move the ball. So, um, we had some growing pains there, but honestly, that, when we really went deep into this style of play, we really had instant dividends. And that's kind of what the consulting business has become. It started as kind of share your offense with me, and I was sharing offense and diagrams and film with coaches all over the country. But I found that I was giving them information and not knowledge, where they couldn't take their experiences and troubleshoot anything, and they couldn't move it further than what I was just giving them through email or text. So the consulting side of it has become, I'll help you plan your practice. You have access to my practices and my practice plan, and my game film and all these other resources, but you also have me as the resource to bounce ideas off of, to help walk you through. I was just in Wisconsin working with a team where I presented to their entire coaching staff on Monday night. Tuesday morning, I worked with their basketball team to help install this. So just my hope is that all the growing pains that I went through for 10 years, I can kind of alleviate you of that, and you can just kind of jump right into the success part.
All right. So I got a couple more questions for you. I really appreciate your time. So when you run a conceptual offense like you run, how do you come up with answers to questions that you've not dealt with before?
I think at this point I've kind of seen it all just
Yeah.
with the experience, but that's a great question because there's all games always changing, and um, we're okay with some gray area there. And I find that you as the coach have to be okay with that. And I think the best way to do that is you don't have to arrive at some steadfast answer. I think the important thing is just asking the player, hey, what did you see there? Because when we're standing on the sideline, I like to stand on the baseline. I love viewing the game from that perspective. But if a player's driving from the wing to the middle, we're going to have a whole different perspective of what we see. I would like to think that I can see all 10 players at the same time, but it's easier when you're not having to make decisions and play defense and all that stuff. So just asking them what they saw and why they arrived at that conclusion. And then I also find that when players ask questions, I used to kind of think it was challenging a little bit, like they're kind of bucking the system a little bit. But I think that's a great thing because I think they're thinking on a deeper level and they want to learn. And we are big on our players not only knowing the concepts but knowing how all of them piece together. So the more questions we can answer, I feel like those light bulbs start to go on.
All right. Last question here. So how has this translated to your defense, you think?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned that pressure has been, the hurdle that we have to continue to get over. So we're a pressure man-to-man defense, and it's had a ripple effect because we want to spend a whole lot more time on offense than we do defense. Just I think in most sports, people will agree that the defense is always ahead of the offense early and offense has to catch up. So instead of doing that, I used to be like the first 3 days, we're not going to touch a ball and we're going to do a whole lot of defense. But then the first game would come and it's kind of rough. We'd turn the ball over a lot. And so we spend a lot more time on offense, but we switch everything on defense and we just try to be really disruptive. And I think switching allows us to have one coverage for every single screen where we don't have to go through a whole lot of different scenarios. Our guys get used to rotation and Xing out because matchups don't mean all that much to us. And if opposing coach is going to spend most of his time worried about exploiting our matchups, then they're worried about us. And we try to worry about ourselves and make sure we're prepared to play the style of game that we want to. So if on Wednesday, Thursday, a coach is talking about countering our switching and our pressure, feel like in a lot of ways we've already created an advantage for ourselves because they're so focused on our game plan.
Gotcha. So let you go. I really appreciate your time. Like I said, real quick, how can people get a hold of you? They like what they've heard. Where would they go to get some more information?
Yeah, so you can go to coachcassio.com is a great place for just to kind of learn more about our style of play, the consulting side, tons of resources on there for you. At Coach Cassio is my Twitter handle. I'm pretty active on Twitter, so feel free to reach out. And then markcassio@gmail.com. Love talking with coaches. That's been like one of the favorite parts of this is just, like being on podcasts like this and building new relationships with coaches all over the country.
All right. Thanks, Coach, so much for coming on. I want to wish you a good rest of the summer. And then, fingers crossed we get that season here in the winter. Good luck with that.
Same to you. Appreciate you having me on.
All right. Thank you. Okay, Coach. Well, I really, let me hit this real quick.